You know what? Let's just do good old fashioned phone call.
Oh.
Okay. So friends, I really apologize for the first few minutes of this snafu. And so we're just going to do the audio. You're going to hear Dr. Paul's voice. You're going to see the book right here. The question that I just asked him was about his ability to be open-minded. And I think that's very important when it comes to nutrition. And I think Paul is one of the most open-minded people in this space. He interviews a lot of people of all sorts of different disciplines on his podcast. And I think it's really needed. So Dr. Paul, one of the questions I wanted to kind of run by you was, you just had Terry Wahls on your podcast. And I think one of the biggest applications of the carnivorous diet and from a clinical perspective that I see is in the remission or the help of autoimmune disorders. After having that conversation, there's a lot of people that talk about going on a high polyphenol plant-based diet. Where do you sit in that construct? I mean, I didn't watch the full episode, but what would you say to someone that has autoimmunity that's kind of torn between these two different constructs?
Yeah, I think that ultimately what we're all striving for is to help people, right? To return people to a quality of life. And so we can do this a lot of different ways. The conversation with Terry Wahls was quite interesting on my podcast, which is Fundamental Health. I'd encourage you to watch that. I wish she and I had a little more time to dig into the nuances of her story. To be frank, I don't know that I believe the narrative the way that she does. She seems to believe, so her story, as she related it to me on the podcast, was that she did a low-fat vegetarian diet for 20 plus years and believes that may have contributed significantly to the development of her autoimmune disease, which I think is something that is very possible. Now, quickly we get into the realm of multifactorial experiments, right? There are many variables here. If indeed a low-fat vegetarian diet contributed to autoimmune disease, what aspect of a low-fat vegetarian diet was harmful for Terry Wahls? Was it the absence of fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin K2, which are only really found in significant amounts in animal foods? Of course, we can find a little bit of vitamin K2 or a moderate amount of vitamin K2 in natto, but I don't think Terry Wahls was eating natto, nor do I think it's a healthy part of a human diet because of the other phytoestrogens in soy. But regardless, was it the absence of a vitamin or mineral on her diet that worsened her autoimmune disease? Was it the presence of myriad plant toxins to which she was reacting, or which were injuring her gut or triggering her immune system? There are many things that could have been causing it. What's interesting is that on her low-fat vegetarian diet, she certainly had lots of polyphenols. And as people will know if they read my book or listen to my work, I challenge the notion of polyphenols. And I think this is a very interesting discussion that I've had with Chris Masterjohn, a little bit with Chris Kresser as well, and that could be a whole rabbit hole that we go down. But I challenge the notion that polyphenols are uniquely beneficial or entirely benevolent for humans. So when Terry Wahls got her autoimmune disease, then she started doing a paleo diet, and that did not improve her autoimmunity. And so you're thinking, okay. And then she did what she calls the Wahls protocol, and this is the most interesting part of the story for me. What was it about the Wahls protocol that is different from her Paleolithic diet that improved her autoimmunity? The Wahls protocol, to me, is a paleo diet. She said she included seafood, organic grass-fed meat, and loads of greens. Terry Wahls emphasizes loads of greens, and she seems to believe that it had to do with the vitamin K in the greens. Now, as I talk about in the book, that I'm not sure that I believe that that's what's going on for her in this equation, because the vitamin K in leafy greens is vitamin K1, which is phyloquinone. What we know is that most humans don't convert that to vitamin K2 really at all. And so for Dr. Wahls to believe that she's getting any biologically active vitamin K from leafy greens is kind of leaves me scratching my head. So I wish I'd had more time to dig into all of that with her. I do not think that there's any magic for polyphenols in autoimmune disease, nor is there any mechanism for that I have ever seen. I don't think fixing autoimmune disease is about, I don't even think you can make hormesis arguments with polyphenols in autoimmune disease. And I certainly don't think that the polyphenols are modulating the immune system in a positive way. So I suspect suspect that when autoimmune disease improves, it is because of the elimination of something that is triggering to the immune system. So, and again, this is just my hypothesis, and I would love to have her back on and really try and drill into that story and understand it. But this is also what's interesting for me about a carnivore diet or a heavily animal-based diet is, can we understand which foods, which plants are most triggering to humans? Can we create, as I do in the book, a spectrum of plant toxicity, and from that infer or give us some sort of a roadmap for which plants we might cut out first? I don't believe that everyone needs to be fully carnivorous, but the message that I hope to share with people is that animal foods are incredibly valuable for humans. They have been wrongly vilified. I break down all that in the book, and that plant foods do contain toxins. That is really undeniable, and they exist on a spectrum of plant toxicity. So my suspicion is that for Terry Wahls, it was the elimination of something rather than the addition of mountains of greens that led to the remission or the improvement in her autoimmunity. I really would like for her to do a carnivore diet. I don't know if she's open to that because it would be quite contrary to what she's expressing with the Wahls protocol, but at this point, she definitely eats grass-fed meat. So it's an interesting nuance, and I think that these are the things we study. And even in the book, I have a section, why do vegan diets work? Which I think is a fascinating question. Why do vegan diets help some people, at least in the short term, before they get nutrient deficient? And I think that a lot of the times it's because they cut out a food that is a trigger. Usually this is not meat, but it could be eggs, it could be dairy, which I think is very triggering for a lot of people. And so this is sort of where we have to try our best to be open-minded, but also try our best to be good scientists and think which variables were changed and which variable was actually the result of this experimental finding that we discovered. And to try and refine that helps us understand, like, oh, okay, this is the lever that we're pulling that is most efficacious. Does all that make sense, Mike?
Oh, it absolutely does. I'm getting a lot of questions here about when the audiobook is coming out.
Audiobook is coming out in about 3 weeks. I recorded it in my voice, you guys.
I love that.
It took 7 days of work. It was a lot of work to do the audiobook. And it's just the way the audiobook works is that you have to do the post-processing, which is now done. And then I have to go and do pickups on Monday. And then the book will be done on Monday. And then you will submit it to Audible. And then Audible takes 18 to 22 days before they actually post it. So it may be up sooner, but it's definitely going to be out within the month of March. And it's in my voice.
Which is amazing. That must be a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, just mentally, just to sit there and read and like find your cadence, like it's got to be tough.
I kind of liked it. Every day, it felt like Groundhog Day, going back to this recording studio and thinking, all right. And it was 7 days. So there's a lot of work and just going through the book very slowly. But I enjoyed it. And it was really fun narrating the book in my voice. As people will hear, the inflection is there. I'm joking. You can hear me smiling. I'm reading my book. I don't think anyone would have been able to do it like I did it. So it was really cool. I think it's going to be a great resource for people.
I think it's awesome. Did you do the podcast style format in between chapters? I know that's kind of popular after David Goggins did that.
No, I didn't, since I recorded the whole thing. And it was already pretty long.
Right. I was just curious about that. But anyway, a lot of folks just asked about that. So they are digging your audio. They can hear you really good right now, Dr. Paul. So thanks for that. So interesting. You have a whole section on vitamin K in there. And I think that a lot of vegans and vegetarians talk about the importance of vitamin K from vegetables, but we don't really hear about the nuances of K1 versus K2. And so the sources for a nose to tail carnivorous style diet in terms of vitamin K specifically would be more the liver and some of the organs.
Liver, organs, egg yolks. There's vitamin K in meat as well. There's vitamin K2 in meat as well. Chicken meat has a lot of vitamin K. Duck fat has vitamin K. I believe that vitamin K is also going to be present in animal fat as well. So vitamin K2 is distributed throughout the animal. I believe there's vitamin K in kidney as well. And it's such an interesting conversation and important discussion, Mike. When I went on the Doctor's TV show, which hopefully people have seen by now, one of the criticisms they did not bring up during the show, which was more like a gang fight, was that they believed that meat did not have vitamin K. And I thought, how incredibly nutritionally uninformed are you if you believe that animal foods don't have vitamin K? If you look up vitamin K content of many foods on the USDA database websites like nutritiondata.self.com, it will say 0. But that's because they were only measuring K1, which is, of course, phyloquinone, which is a different molecule than the menaquinones, which exist as MK4, MK5, all the way to MK11, as far as we know. So the menaquinones have different chain lengths. But like I suggested earlier, the menaquinones generally don't occur in plant foods. They are products of bacterial fermentation and can be in some fermented food like natto, which I discussed my reservations regarding, but they're much more present in animal foods because in the rumen of animal guts, this vitamin K2 can be produced and then incorporated into their tissues as a nutrient. We don't really produce a whole lot of vitamin K2 in our gut, as far as I know, nor are we very good at converting K1 into K2. But if people are familiar with this literature, they'll know that vitamin K2 seems to be crucial for proper calcium partitioning in the body. In the book, I talk about a series of studies. They're all epidemiology, but the results are quite striking that associate pretty clearly higher levels of vitamin K2 intake with decreased incidence of cardiovascular disease and calcific aortic sclerosis. And it's basically a linear correlation with the upper tertiles. They divided people in the Rotterdam study into 3 groups based on how much vitamin K2 they were getting. The upper group only got 32 micrograms of vitamin K2 a day. You could get 3 times that amount easily with 1 serving of liver. So I wish they'd done a higher group, right? But you can imagine, like, what kind of people are getting less. I think the smallest tertile, you have the graphic there in front of you, is probably 15 micrograms of vitamin K2 per day. That is an infinitesimal amount. That's basically a vegetarian, or less, right? That's a plant-based eater, or just a processed food-based eater to get that little vitamin K2. Any amount of well-raised animal foods will provide a large amount of vitamin K2. What was also very interesting about the Rotterdam study was that there was no association between intake of vitamin K1 and these outcomes. And if we really were able to convert phyloquinone into menaquinone in any particular fashion in our body, then you would imagine that if people were eating lots of leafy greens and getting lots of K1, that also may be helpful or show an improvement in coronary heart disease deaths or calcific aortic sclerosis, but they do not. And that's shown repeatedly in studies. I think there are at least 3 studies that I referenced in the book, or 2 or 3 that show that correlation with K2 but not K1. So when plant-based advocates talk about vitamin K, I think I kind of do the facepalm, and I think, do you know the data with this? Like, you're not converting K1 to K2, just like plant-based eaters are not converting ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, to EPA and DHA. They're just not doing it well. I talk about that study in the book as well. So these plant-based nutrients often don't get converted to our bioavailable forms, which are found in animals.
It's amazing. On page 231, you have a chart where you have fish, kale, liver, muscle meat, things like that. And if you look at the difference on all the different micronutrients, kale is kind of touted as a superfood. But if you looked at the micronutrients on the table, again, folks, page 231 of the book, that's right to the right of me, I think the only superior micronutrient in kale was calcium, if I'm correct. So it's pretty amazing. If you look at liver and muscle meat and the amount of iron, the amount of zinc, and if magnesium, riboflavin in liver, it was just like there's so many more micronutrients in the animal animal-derived compounds compared to, say, kale, which a lot of people think is some superfood. So do you want to talk about that and then maybe the bioavailability differences between maybe the calcium and the other minerals that are in, say, kale? Are we able to absorb those, Paul?
We're not really very well. So people may know that I was a raw vegan for about 7 months, and I had a very large amount of magnesium in my diet. I had a huge amount of magnesium in my diet. I used to go to the grocery store and buy 2 heads of kale per day. They always looked at me funny when I bought 6 heads of kale. And then I would also eat lots of almonds. According to nutritional databases, I had much higher than the RDA, the recommended daily allowance for magnesium in my diet, from what many would say are the proper sources of magnesium, namely leafy greens and almonds. And I was frankly deficient in magnesium. When I tested RBC, red blood cell magnesium, when I tested functional analyses of magnesium, I was getting gallbladder spasms because I was so deficient in magnesium. I would get these shooting pains in the upper right quadrant of my body, which is where your gallbladder is. And I would get these weird cramping sensations. And I thought, what is going on? And when we did analyses, my magnesium was in the toilet. And the reason for this is applicable to all of the minerals that we see touted as being present in plant foods. They're not bioavailable because they're chelated. They're wrapped into a molecule that bites them. Chelation means bite. And it's either phytic acid or oxalic acid, which is also oxalates, and it significantly decreases the bioavailability of these minerals. This is a point that I talk about in the book. Plant-based operating systems and animal-based operating systems are different. We're not meant to be herbivorous, and when we try and eat plants, we do not incorporate their nutrients into our body well at all. And this is because plants don't really package minerals the way our body is expecting. It chelates them, and these chelating molecules prevent us from absorbing them. There's a great study I talk about in the book looking at iron absorption, and you can extend the analogy to all of the minerals. You can look at a food like oysters, which are in that study. They have a huge amount of zinc, not iron. Oysters have a huge amount of zinc. You can see blood levels of zinc rise after eating oysters. If you eat those oysters with black beans, the absorption of zinc is decreased about 70%. If you add a tortilla and black beans to the oysters, the absorption of zinc is completely abolished, meaning that you will not absorb any of the zinc in oysters if you eat those oysters with phytic acid and oxalic acid containing phytic acid and oxalic acid containing beans and tortillas. So this is the idea that we are told these foods, almonds, kale, have magnesium. We're told they have selenium. We're told they have calcium. But the bioavailability is much lower than we're expecting. And the same is true with protein. And I know this is a whole thing that James Wilk was talking about on Joe Rogan. And I did a whole podcast on my podcast really pointing out many of the flaws to his rebuttal regarding the DIAS, the digestible indispensable amino acid score ratings. But what we find is that protein is also not as bioavailable from plants. And so if you go down the list, there's a whole chapter about this. Chapter 8 in the book is all about how plant foods compare to animal foods in terms of nutrient availability, nutrient density, nutrient presence, and which are the real superfoods. And I highlight all these points in there.
Amazing. I just held up that image, page 127 on the book, that shows the bioavailability of protein from animals versus plants. Just wanted people to see that. But again, I think we're running into a lot of cognitive biases. I mean, just to be totally honest, and I don't want to pivot gears too much here, but I feel like the biggest roadblock to accepting on a bigger scale the carnivorous diet is just this idea that, gosh, we have to have a salad to be healthy, because it was like indelibly inked. Like my parents, I remember my father would say about his father that when he had congestive heart failure, that the man never ate a salad in his life. But he also had high carb diet. He had meat with bread and pasta and stuff like that, right? So I think for a lot of people, there's still this little thing in the back of our minds. And I was working with a client just the other day I was getting him to eat more red meat and flesh and stuff, but he still wanted to have this big salad, right? And it's like he still had digestive issues. So how do we help from a mindset standpoint, change that perception that we have to have these compounds because they're perceived as being so healthy?
When I get into conversations with people, I think you're right, Mike. There's a lot of conditioning that limits us. I think anyone listening to this live stream is probably aware of this conditioning, and they're already, woke. They're already waking up and realizing it. I think that it's the people who are not listening to this podcast or this live stream that are still kind of going to be stuck in that conditioning. If I'm talking to someone in person and I see that conditioning arising, I'll just kind of ask them in a Socratic fashion, like, what is it about plants that you believe is so healthy? And quickly what we discover is that we are basing our conceptualization, our paradigm on things we have been told. And I get this because not everybody wants to be a doctor or has been to medical school or wants to read all the literature in detail, nor do they have time or training, right? Some are engineers or they're firefighters or policemen, and they're kind of relying on you and I to help them understand the literature. And so but I think that what people will quickly realize is that, I just know that I've been told that, but I've never really been presented any evidence that that is the case. And so that's what that chapter 8 in the book is meant to be, in conjunction with probably chapter 5, which is about the polyphenols. Because when people think they need a salad, they think, aren't there vitamins and minerals in there that I need, number one? And in chapter 8, which is a comparison of the nutrient availability and nutrient presence in plant versus animal foods, I try to lay out my case that, hey, there is nothing in that salad in terms of vitamins and minerals that you cannot get in animal foods in a more bioavailable form. There's nothing there. And we can talk about vitamin C if you want to go down that rabbit hole, but there's nothing in that salad. And then the other piece of that equation that people always say, what about the polyphenols? What about phytonutrients? Which is kind of this whole different sort of bugaboo. And we can go down that rabbit hole as well. So the thing with polyphenols is we've always assumed polyphenols is used broadly. There are plant compounds that are not polyphenolic, like isothiocyanates, which do not have multiple aromatic rings. But generally speaking, the term polyphenols, quote unquote, has been used to sort of characterize phytonutrients. And I think that chapter 5 is going to be very eye-opening for people, in which I lay out some evidence that maybe these compounds are not the way we've been told they are. I frame it a little differently. Polyphenols are plant defense molecules, and some of us appear to be able to detoxify them better than others, but they've really been sold to us as something that makes humans better, when in fact, for a lot of people, they can be harmful. And these are just one of the plant compounds that can be harmful to people. There are chapters in the book about oxalates and lectins and isothiocyanates, and I talk about salicylates. And again, not everyone is going to be exquisitely sensitive to all of these, but some people are very sensitive to these. So when we start to understand, number one, that there are no vitamins or minerals in plant foods that we cannot get in more robust amounts in a more bioavailable form in animal foods, and then we can talk about the vitamin C thing. And number two, the corollary to that is that there are many nutrients in animal foods that are not present at all in plant foods: choline, carnitine, creatine, carnosine, taurine, anserine, vitamin K2, B12, et cetera, And then number three, that the compounds that we've been told are phytonutrients are not necessarily needed to be optimal as humans. And that gets into kind of a nuanced discussion that I talk about in the book, but there's plenty of evidence that they may be harmful in some situations. So when the benefit of plants evaporates, we think, if you want to eat plants for variety, for entertainment, for taste, for color, okay, but if they're causing you problems, if they're causing you digestive issues, if they're potentially triggering an immunologic system, an immunologic reaction or immunologic symptoms, you can absolutely leave them out of your diet. And I just encourage people to do that for a short amount of time, a month, 2 months, and see if they feel differently. Do the elimination thing, but realize that it's safe to do and that they can then observe symptoms. I think that's the best test. It's just getting people over that hump. And the way that I've kind of reasoned it out is, look, you're not missing any nutrients. Those plant compounds are really not that magical. You've seen my Instagram. I have this sort of tongue-in-cheek meme that I'll do every once in a while. I'll post a picture of myself and I'll say, look, I got a polyphenol deficiency. It's end-stage polyphenol deficiency. And for people that have seen pictures of me, like, I'm a pretty fit guy. Like, I work out. I'm tan. I have a six-pack. Like, I'm healthy. So this is my year and a half plus polyphenol deficiency. This is what it looks like for a year and a half with no polyphenols. I have end-stage polyphenol deficiency. But I think you're right. It's just kind of combating that, helping people to examine why they believe a salad is useful.
Yeah. I mean, it's like calories in, calories out. It's all these things we've been told from so many different people over the years. And we hear so much, I think, about antioxidants and free radicals and how these compounds, and I admit, like, I was the most polyphenolic proponent in the world. I mean, if you see my backyard, Dr. Paul, I mean, a ton of vegetables and berries, and I was like the guy. And so when the carnivorous diet started to come on, I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world because
I know.
You're not getting right. Anyway, but there's a bunch of questions in here about poop, and I want to share with you a story. So some of you may know, if you see me on Instagram, last week I had a hernia procedure, and I decided, okay, I want to reduce my baseline level of inflammation so my immune system and my body can repair as quickly as possible. So I did basically full carnivore the week before. During the hospital, I had nothing but animal products outside of a little coconut butter. And everyone was complaining the day after the procedure. So I was under sedation, fentanyl. A lot of people were taking all these NSAIDs and Tylenol to minimize the pain. I didn't take any of that. I was one of the only people out of 32 men, because I went to this place called the Shouldice Hernia Surgical Center in Toronto. I was the only person on day one to go number 2. And so I think this is a big roadblock. People are like, okay, well, if you go carnivore, you're not going to have any fiber to kind of push things through. bowel movement wise, I haven't noticed any major, deleterious changes either way. But Paul, there's a lot of questions on our YouTube live feed saying, hey, what about the bowel? What about poops? Should they look different? Like, can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is chapters 9 and 10 in the book, you guys. I got you all covered. I've written about all of it in the book. Please check out the Carnivore Code. But yeah, there's very clear experiential evidence from myself and thousands of others in the carnivore community, and literature evidence within the medical sphere, that fiber is not necessary for regular elimination of stool. And this gets a little complex because people are very individual. They can have a different microbiome, and people will all construct a carnivore diet uniquely. One of the things that I did in the book toward the end was added a whole chapter 13 about pitfalls. If people develop constipation on a carnivore diet, it's almost always due to not enough fat. A lot of times when people do a carnivore diet, they do it, in my opinion, incorrectly. It's really not as simple as steaks. There needs to be certain ratios of fat to protein in order to get the bowels to work properly. We know this as humans. And I've experienced this myself. If I don't do enough fat, I will get a little constipated. It's not horrible for me. I'll tell you that over the year and a half plus that I've been doing a carnivore diet, I've basically had a very easy to pass stool in the morning once a day, every day. So I have not gotten constipated. It's not a truism that humans need fiber to avoid constipation. But I have seen people who are doing lean hamburger or lean steaks exclusively get constipation because that's a human physiologic response, and that's not the way to do this diet. The fat to protein ratio is very critical. We know that humans cannot really sustainably make protein more than 35 to 40% of their calories. And the other 65 to 60% of the calories, and I'm not saying that 35% of calories is ideal either. I think 70-30 is probably ideal when it comes to calories, between fat at 70 and protein at 30, which works out to about 1-to-1 fat to protein in grams per day. But if people want to go to 35% protein or higher, the remaining 60 to 65% or 70% of the calories must come from either fat or carbohydrates. They must. If they do not, we're going to run into problems, and our bowels are also not going to work either. So when people introduce fiber into their diet on a carnivore diet, they're also introducing more carbohydrates. But if they also put back in more fat, their bowels will become better. So the stools do look different on a carnivore diet. They're smaller, and I only have a bowel movement once a day. A carnivore diet, contrary to popular belief, is a very bioavailable diet. It's very low residue. Fiber is high residue. The reason you poop more on a high fiber diet is not because you are fixing constipation. It's because there is more indigestible cellulose in those plants that must go all the way through your digestive tract and back out. Now, in the book, I talk about potential downsides of plant fiber, including disruption of hormonal balance. I specifically cite one study that showed that women who ate more fiber were more likely to have anovulation, an interruption of normal menstrual cycles. There's other studies which show that people who eat more fiber are at a higher risk of nutrient deficiencies, because we know that fiber can bind to minerals also and prevent our absorption of them. But in general, we do not need fiber to poop. There's always troubleshooting on individual cases, and in the case of this, it's usually not enough fat or not enough salt. But yeah, the stools do look different, and they should be easy to pass. And if they're not, I would recommend that people sort of look at the book and look at the really clear guidelines that I lay out in there for how to construct the diet.
I love that chapter. Sorry, was it 9? The pitfalls?
9 and 10.
9 and 10. Yeah, that was amazing. Because a lot of people that I've connected with on Instagram and stuff said, hey, I tried this carnivore thing, but I also can't sleep. And that goes back to what you were saying, is just a lot of the high protein and not enough fat. And I think a lot of people are scared of fat still. I mean, even with the whole keto movement, people hear, okay, I'm going to go carnivore. I'm going to try this 0 carb thing, but they're getting all these lean cuts of meat and not supplementing with animal-based fats. And that's a big question that's coming up here on YouTube, Paul, is, okay, what about suet? Where do I get my animal fat? Is it all just from the cuts of meat, or should I supplement it? I know you're a big fan of suet and supplementing with fat. So can you walk us through some pitfalls and solutions for how to get good fat?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times if you're getting a steak, so I got some steaks from Bel Campo. They were bone and ribeyes, and they had so much fat on them. So Belcampo is a farm in Northern California, grass-fed, grass-finished, doing regenerative agriculture. These are like primo steaks. And they had tons of fat on them. And there was a big piece of fat next to the rib, and there was a big fat cap. But, I am certainly an advocate for regeneratively raised meat. I'm an advocate for grass feeding and grass finishing. And depending on where people are getting that meat from, it may not be as fatty as we would like. I've also gotten ribeyes from White Oak Pastures, which are incredible. And a lot of them are very fatty. They have a little bit fat strip in them. Now, in that case, you probably won't need to supplement any fat if you have a fatty steak from a good farm. If you're getting grass-fed meat and you're going for cheaper cuts, which is fine, like sirloin or chuck roast or tri-tip, I have found that it works best if I supplement with fat. Now, I'll just add this here because a lot of people find trouble with a carnivore diet because they say it's expensive. And I would say, yes, if you do it with ribeyes, it can be expensive. Now, if you can afford that, great. You're going to love it. If you want to do a more affordable version, you can just get chuck roast as steaks, and they're very lean. They're very tender. They're pretty darn good, and they're $9 a pound, like what you pay for a nice grass-fed ground beef. You can get chuck roast. I went to the store the other day and got a Wagyu chuck roast. It was $12 a pound, and it was really good. It was really rich and good, but it was a grass-fed Wagyu chuck roast. So you can get leaner cuts of meat for cheaper and then add the fat separately. Suet is good. Suet is kidney fat. It's waxy, and not everyone likes it. You have to heat it a little bit. The trimmings are what I prefer. And again, these are things we're not used to, and it butts up against our conditioning. And we're always thinking like, I don't know, I'm not going to eat straight fat, but that's what I found to be most helpful. U.S. Wellness Meats sells, quote, suet, which is really trimming. And that's been a real help for me. They sell it in a 5-pound bag. It's kind of like it's put through a grinder. It's a coarse ground fat, but it works great. I just eat it raw. If you want to heat it up a little bit, you can. And that's a great way to add fat to your meat. And that will really help with sort of balancing out the meat in your diet, whether you're doing a carnivore diet or not. So I'll just back up. I know I'm jumping around you guys, but there's so much cool stuff that I want to share with you. So I recommend, I talk about all this in the book in detail, you guys, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight at your goal weight as a start, and then 1 gram of fat for every gram of protein. Now, that's if you're doing a full nose-to-tail carnivore diet. If you want to include some carbohydrates in your diet, which I think is totally fine, you want that sort of 1-to-1 fat to protein to become 1-to-1 fat plus carbs to protein. So in terms of grams. So for instance, if I'm about 175 pounds right now. If I were going to do, I've done a full carnivore diet for 99% of the last year and a half, and then recently I've been messing around with some carbohydrate introductions, which I can talk about. I don't really feel a whole lot different. And some of it had some sort of mishaps, which I can talk about as well. But when I was doing that, I would do 1-to-1 fat to protein plus carbs, meaning if I was getting 170 grams of protein per day, or 175 grams of protein per day, give or take, then I would have a combination of fat and carbs that equaled about 170 grams. So if I were going to eat, for instance, squash, which was one of the carbs that I tried to incorporate, and I was going to get 50 to 60 grams of squash carbohydrates, I would decrease my fat accordingly. And then I did white rice, which really did not work well for me at all. I don't think that's a healthy food for humans, but I tried it. And it definitely seemed to make me feel fat, and I gained weight that I don't think was muscle mass. But I would do the same thing. I would calculate how many carbs, this is as a basis, how many carbs do I incorporate, and I would decrease the fat. So if you keep the fat the same, so for instance, if you were to do 170 grams of protein, 170 grams of fat, and then add carbs on top of that, you will gain weight. That's going to cause the human body to overconsume, and that's going to be mixed fat and carbs, which, as I talk about in the book, is sort of a formula for the body to store fat, both through de novo lipogenesis with carbohydrates, and the fat that you're taking in will get stored if you mix or you overeat calories on a mixed macronutrient diet of a moderate amount of fat and carbohydrates. Again, all this is in the book, you guys. So, but that was sort of the way I see it. So if you want to do carnivore, which I think is great, I would do 1-to-1 fat to protein. If you want to have some carbs, in the book, I recommend what I would consider to be safer sources of carbohydrates. What I have found for myself is that honey is the best one. It's actually probably carnivore in some ways. It's not from it's not from plants. It doesn't seem to have any defense compounds that we're aware of. It's kind of made by bees. So it's not trying to defend itself. And contrary to popular belief, I think this is one thing that I wish I'd changed in the book. I talked to a periodontist named Al Dannenberg, who told me that the tooth decay observed in tribes that eat a lot of honey was probably due to the fact that they consumed it as a whole honeycomb, which had a lot of propolis in it, which is very sticky and caused the sugars to stick on their teeth. There's apparently some data out there that I think James and Nicole Antonio sent this to me as well, that honey does not contribute to tooth decay, which I thought was quite interesting, perhaps because of the other compounds that are in it that we haven't fully studied. There are other chemicals in honey that may be benign or maybe anti-tooth decay in humans. But honey seems to me, when I want to do carbohydrates, and I'm still trying to figure out if I feel any different with carbohydrates versus zero carb in my diet or very low carb, I will choose honey. But white rice didn't work for me at all. I think that it's too processed. And I don't want brown rice because of the arsenic in the hull. Right. And white rice doesn't have any fiber, so that's good. But I think that it's too processed and there's too much of a dopamine response to white rice because of how quickly it's going to deliver those glucose polymers to the body, that it was impossible not to overeat it. And I actually, eating moderate amounts of rice, I actually really felt my body composition change negatively pretty quickly. So that was interesting. Squash seems to be a little better for me, but I did develop eczema again on squash, which is interesting. I get this sort of eczema tramp stamp on my lower back. And I thought, geez, that's crazy. It's cut out squash. It's completely gone. And that was the reason that I went carnivore in the first place, was eczema, believing that autoimmunity is something that we should not ignore. And if I'm triggering my autoimmune disease, my hypothesis, the way that I would frame that, is that I'm doing something in the gut that I don't want to be doing. And that's why I cut the squash back out. And then I tried honey, and it's like, oh, of course I'm getting a raw organic honey, and I'm not over consuming it. But I actually don't feel as compelled to over consume honey as I did with the other carbohydrates like white rice. So that's a little aside, but I'm sure people will be curious about that.
Oh, I'm very curious. Now, the time around exercise, was that when you were consuming the honey, or was this in the evening? Like, how come you were consuming it in the first place?
I think because I was curious. You hear people say online, and I've had conversations with Stan Efferding very frequently, and I did a podcast with him. People will say like, oh, you need carbs to get explosive, or you need carbs to grow your muscles bigger, or you need carbs to get stronger. So I just thought, you know what, I've been doing strict carnivore for a year and a half. Let's do some honey or some carbs for a few days. Kind of at both meals, I would do carbs. So there would be one meal in the morning and one meal in the evening, and I would do carbs at both meals. Let's just see, like, do I feel differently? Does my weight change significantly? Do my muscles look differently? Does my strength change? And really nothing seems to change at all for me. I don't feel better necessarily. I don't weigh a whole lot different. And I don't feel a whole lot stronger. So I'm still kind of in the experiment. I've been doing it for the last couple of weeks using different types of carbohydrates. Like I said, I've had some snafus, but I am curious. And I think that I hope to remain open-minded. You said this in the beginning. I don't know if people heard the conversation about that, but look, I'm happy to try it and reincorporate it and say, is there anything to this? In the conversation I had with Stan Efferding, and I've talked about the FASTER study, and there are multiple studies in low-carb diets that suggest that once humans are keto-adapted, the levels of glycogen are essentially equivalent between low-carb athletes and high-carb athletes. So there's, just like anything else, there's so much misinformation and promotion of bro science in the space that people say, you need glycogen stores to be full, to be explosive, or to be strong, which is probably true. And you can't get that unless you eat carbs, which I believe is totally false. Now, if you are making ketones in the human body, I believe that your liver glycogen stores are low, but your muscle glycogen stores can be high, because that is what gluconeogenesis does, and that is how we make the glucose that our body uses when we are not eating significant amounts of glucose. We can do gluconeogenesis, and I have yet to see really any convincing data that gluconeogenesis is in any way, shape, or form harmful for humans, though I'm open to that and still sort of digging into that literature. I've had a number of debates with people who are on the Ray Peat sort of side of the fence, Chris Masterjohn and others. And, I'm just not convinced that gluconeogenesis is harmful to humans. But so I thought, okay, well, if people want to be carnivore, like, here's honey. Here's a way to be carnivore that's not low carb. So you can do it low carb, you can do it not low carb, and let's be honest, honey's delicious. So, but I don't miss honey when I'm not eating it. I just wanted to see if it changed my performance, and I'm still doing that experiment, but I haven't really seen a big change, to be honest. I was a little bummed. I was hoping that I would just be like, oh man, I'm even like more Superman now. And I'm like, no, I'm still doing pretty good. I guess maybe it's a success. I guess there's no real success or failure in that experiment.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. I personally am a big fan of honey, and I remember Lauren Cordain back in his first version of the paleo diet talked a lot about it, and that's when I kind of got my eyes on it. And there's some immune supporting properties. People that have allergies are supposed to be able to get some sort of benefit if they take honey that's been produced locally from bees and all that sort of fun stuff. But while you're talking, Paul, there was a great question that came in about glucose baseline and how it there might be more flux, or the baseline might increase when someone transitions to a carnivore style diet. I know that happened with Sean Baker and a few others. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, the glucose baseline does change a little bit when you transition to a carnivore diet based on the protein to fat macro. Sean's increase was bigger than I would have preferred. And I'll just mention to people that Sean and I are great friends. We respectfully disagree on many things. One of them is the amount of pure meat that Sean eats, and I suspect that his glucose baseline, though he doesn't like to retest. I've encouraged him to retest his labs multiple times, and he just won't, which is a source of consternation for me. Because yes, so the idea is this: if you eat a lot of protein, it does appear that, though canonically we've considered the gluconeogenesis to be demand driven, it does appear to be partially supply driven as well. And we see this pathology in type 2 diabetes. I don't necessarily have to go into all of the biochemistry there, but in type 2 diabetes, the rising levels of blood glucose that are fasting are connected with inappropriate gluconeogenesis because of all the substrates that are being released from the adipocytes because of the insulin resistance there. So when the adipocytes don't see insulin signaling, despite high levels of insulin, that's what we call pathological insulin resistance. And they're going to release substrate into the bloodstream, which then triggers some degree of gluconeogenesis at the liver. And so we know that gluconeogenesis is at least somewhat supply driven. So yes, if we overeat protein, it does appear that we can drive up fasting levels of glucose. But in my experience working with clients on a carnivore diet, if you're eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, we don't really see that to any great extent. I've seen in myself and many others on fully carnivorous diets, fasting glucose levels in the 80s, high 70s, mid 80s. That's fine. And if people are really eating a lot of meat, which I just don't know that I believe that over 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight for most people is beneficial. It can go higher, and we try and adjust that. And I don't know if that's a problem or not. In the book, I provide continuous glucose monitor readings of a friend of mine who's a client, and you can see what his CGM looks like on a carnivore diet. It's basically a very gently undulating, mostly flat line. Maybe you can show that picture, Mike. But
sure.
But the baseline can be, maybe 5 to 10 milligrams per deciliter higher than it may be off of a carnivore diet. I'm not convinced that's a problem. And again, it's linked to the amount of protein in your diet and probably a little bit of demand or supply-driven gluconeogenesis. The other thing we know is that the morning glucose fasting is probably the highest one that a lot of people get throughout the day, or at least one of those peaks because of the cortisol awakening response and the way that the body is going to make more glucose in the morning when cortisol is released. And that's part of the normal circadian pattern of our awakening.
Which is totally normal and welcomed and accepted. I think a lot of people...
It appears to be,
people put cortisol in this box that it's always bad. And the people will say, it's these counter-regulatory hormones. But gosh, these are normal physiologic responses you want to have happening, especially, depending upon the time of the day that they're occurring. And you just mentioned in the morning. So yeah, I think what I love about your approach, Paul, is you always put things in context, and you have an open mind. You're trying honey, you tried, you said squashes, and that's a bummer that they made your psoriasis or eczema flare up.
Yeah. Well, but I don't see it as either here. I don't think of it as either good or bad. I just think of it as, hey, that was a valuable experiment.
Yeah.
And I could try and reach it at some point. And going back to the poop conversation, because we love talking about poop, my poops were still once a day, but they were bigger on squash because there's some fiber. But I wasn't eating squash for any nutrient. I was eating squash to change my physiology and the macronutrients to increase carbs and see how I felt. And again, it was It wasn't anything magical for me, but I do like honey, and I think that honey will probably be a part of my carnivore diet from now on, at least occasionally. And I may play around with honey, like it sounds you have, after workouts, before workouts, to see if there's any difference. And I think there will probably be a lot of days where I don't do any honey. So this is sort of a fascinating thing for me. This question, which I'm sure we'll continue to discuss moving forward, is should humans be in ketosis all the time? Should we cycle in and out? I don't think we know. I've yet to see anything that really suggests that long-term ketosis is harmful, but I'm curious. And, there are many in the space who appear to preach the message we should cycle in and out, and I'm open to the possibility of that. I'm just not convinced that we need to. But, incorporating honey every once in a while seems like a reasonable way to cycle out of ketosis and see if we feel better or worse. I think that most people listening to this are pretty savvy. That's one of the cool things about being in the space, is that the people that listen to us are really smart and really well informed, and people can do their own experiments and say, like, hey, incorporate squash, throw some spinach back in your diet. We probably wouldn't recommend spinach, but if you really want to, put some kale back in your diet and see how you feel. I don't think it's going to be good. Or, put some coffee in or take some coffee out, or do a carnivore diet, put in carbs, take carbs out, see what you feel. I hope to give people that flexibility with the book by creating the plant toxicity spectrum, and the foods that I incorporated were foods that I thought were probably lower on the plant toxicity spectrum. I didn't put rice low on the plant toxicity spectrum in the book, and that probably was the correct answer after my experience with it. But squash is a pretty low toxicity food for a lot of people, I believe, as are avocados, olives, berries, things like that.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about squash that I wanted to mention is all the seeds that are in there. So that could be part of it, is the proximity of the seeds and the reproductive capacity of the trying to pass on the lineage of that fruiting body, if you will, of the squash. It could just be the anti-nutrient proximity or something. But I've grown squash. What I like about squash and some of those other kind of starchy carbs is bugs don't like to grow on them compared to things like broccoli. I mean, bugs love broccoli. So a lot of people are eating cauli rice. A lot of people are having kale all the time. Like, bugs love those foods. And so they're heavily sprayed if you don't grow them yourself. So that's the thing that I think the message is not really being conveyed through kind of the plant dogma, is all these compounds come, if you're not growing them yourselves, you're getting a residual, exposure to environmental chemicals and herbicides, pesticides, things like that, which is no good. So anyway, something to keep in mind and consider. There's more data coming out. But Paul, just want to thank you again for coming on the show. Sorry about that we couldn't have the video here. Hopefully you all enjoyed the audio version, listening to Paul. And then I got the book right to the right of me. It's really well written, friends. A lot of references, good charts. Definitely check it out wherever books are sold. I know it's available on Amazon as Kindle and the paperback. Let's see how many pages. Over 326, which is amazing. And we got the audiobook coming in.
600 references.
Tons of references. No, dude, I mean,
600 references. Yeah. People can just
really
go to the Carnivore. You can Google, you can look up, you can search Carnivore Code, the Carnivore Code on Amazon, or you can go to thecarnivorecodebook.com. And it'll take you right to the Amazon page. And so, yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Super excited to have the book out there. It's so much fun to be a part of this.
Absolutely. Keep up the great work, Paul. Have fun in LA tonight. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, brother.
All right, my man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
All right, all. So I'm going to take this off. Appreciate you tuning in. What questions do you have here? Sorry that we couldn't have Paul actually with his face, on camera. There was a little snafu with the Zoom and everything like that, but just want to say hello. Hope you had a great week. Thanks for tuning in to the live stream. We didn't post a podcast this week because I was in Toronto and I had a hernia procedure. As you heard, Dr. Paul and I kind of talk about that, and just had to. I'm going to turn down his audio. And so I got a show coming tomorrow for you. But yeah, it was crazy, man. So a lot of people in the hospital had a lot of carbs, a lot of fiber, a lot of plants, and none of them could go to the bathroom. I mean, so I went to Shouldice Hospital to get this hernia repaired. You can Google it. It's outside of Toronto. And all these people, all folks could talk about, essentially during, lunches and dinners and stuff, which I went for social purposes. I didn't actually eat the food. Thankfully, a gal by the name of Nikki. Her Instagram hashtag is plant fixed, or she used to be a vegan vegetarian, had all these health issues. Plant Survivor, that was it. That's her @Plant Survivor over on Instagram. She recommended this local South African store, and they had a lot of biltong. So I walked down there, and the guy's name was Neil. I'll put links here below. So I basically in the hospital lived off biltong fat and biltong and some keto bricks, and that was basically it. And I was going to the bathroom every day, and it felt really good because, hearing all these people saying they were constipated, they can't go to the bathroom, like what's up with their bowels? Anyway, I think it's a common thing that can happen after surgery. So, super interesting stuff. I know a lot of you have questions about poop, but definitely support Paul, support his book. It's a really good book. Buy it for a friend, buy it for someone that you care about, your father, your mother, things like that. Let's get to some questions here. JD Freedom Lover says, great job, Mike. Hope you have a great recovery. Yeah, it's been healing great. It's now been day 7, so I'm feeling a lot better today. Travis says, why are you married to the carnivore diet when you know low carb paleo is the way to go? Hey man, I do low carb paleo sometimes as well. I'm not married to any one diet. I'm intrigued by the carnivore diet. Believe me, I thought it was the dumbest thing since sliced bread when people first started talking about it. I've made fun of it so many times on this podcast until I was shopping for groceries. I was at, it's called PCC Professional or Pacific Co-op, Pacific Northwest Co-op, a community co-op. It's a natural grocer here in Seattle. And this guy just ran into me, says, hey, Mike, I've been listening to your podcast for years. Just want you to know that I've lost 50 pounds on the carnivore diet. I would appreciate it if you would stop poking fun at it. And he looked really healthy. And I was like, you know what? Why am I making fun of this diet when it's helping people? And then my wife went on the carnivore diet for 6 months, and it really improved her mental well-being, energy, and all that. And I was like, all right, look, I obviously had some biases against this because I invested a lot of money and a lot of time growing garden beds and vegetables. And I didn't realize, in hindsight, I was like, if I'm being honest, I didn't want to hear that this stuff was bad for me. So I was like trying to put up a wall. And anyway, so now I use carnivore, but I also cycle carbs. I don't have autoimmunity. I don't have GI issues. So if I have a few carbs, it totally doesn't wreck me. But I think as Location 515 says, keto carny is the way to go. I would agree that, I think it can be super helpful. But Don says, what to eat if coronavirus gets started? Yeah. So I think that's what he is referring to. So, the coronavirus, I mean, look, you're more likely to die in a car wreck. You're more likely to get run over crossing a crosswalk than to die from the coronavirus. But I think it's realistic. It's a good time to talk about immune health. And I think we can all benefit from better sleep, better stress management, more micronutrients, as Dr. Paul talks about in the Carnivore Code. The vitamin A, the vitamin D, the zinc, the iron, some of the different cofactors that are involved in immunity. Selenium, they're rich. You can get a lot of those different micronutrients in a nose to tail carnivore diet. So definitely check that out. Jim D says, Deanna looks amazing after carnivore. Yeah, I mean, she really got super lean. She's thinking about doing a figure fitness competition and not even dieting, not even changing anything, but just doing carnivore 1 meal a day. Someone says, honesty is endearing. Thank you for that. Enka says, thanks for the great podcast. I appreciate that as well. What other questions do we have here? Susan says, I recommend The Mind Illuminated by Kuladosa, best meditation guide, very clear as well. Yeah, so that could be, sounds like a good book. I would definitely check that out. What I've found, I did a 1-day meditation retreat, and it was after a 10-week course through the Vipassana meditation group, the Insight Meditation Society. It's the Vipassana technique. What I found is doing some breath work before meditating can be very helpful. So every morning I use the Insight meditation timer, and I do do some breath work, which is basically a hyperventilation followed by retention. We talked a lot about that with Josh Trent on the podcast recently, which was really fun. So if you want to check that out, just go into our website, highintensityhealth.com, and search for Josh Trent. And we talk about and go through a demonstration about how to do this sort of breath work. What other question we have here from Hadi says, sugar shouldn't be overused. Fat adaptation is the optimal approach, in my opinion. Sounds good. He said he ate just figs a few times. Okay, so thank you for that. So, yeah, friends, hope you have an awesome weekend. Thanks for tuning in. And as I mentioned, the links are below to the book. And we'll catch you in a future episode down the road. I'm sorry that you couldn't see Paul's face, his beautiful face, but he's all over YouTube, all over Instagram, and you can see him there. And yeah, so appreciate you tuning in to this 45-minute live stream. We'll catch you soon. Bye, guys.